signals. You may not realize it, but your life depends on not only the aspect being correct, but the train crew following them as well. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of every aspect out there, cause there's a lot, but in general, green means the block is clear and proceed at track speed. Yellow means reduce speed and prepare to stop at the next signal, which will be red, meaning stop. The block is occupied by another train. Just like traffic signals on the road as you drive, as long as you follow the signals accordingly, you'll have nothing to worry about. However, when engineers don't follow the signal aspects accordingly, not only do they pose the risk of getting fired, it can lead to grave consequences. Our story begins on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy's main line in Naperville, Illinois, a suburb of DuPage County, just 28 miles or 45 kilometers west of Chicago's Union Station. The 3-track main runs from Chicago to Aurora, Illinois, and is often nicknamed the Racetrack by locals, as the line sees frequent and fast traffic, often traveling at over 80 miles an hour. The outside tracks typically have freight and local commuter trains running in one direction each way. The middle track, though, was used for intercity and express commuter trains, such as the famous Flyers in either direction, including 2 certain ones we'll focus on today, the Advance Flyer and the Exposition Flyer, both going west from Chicago, Illinois to Oakland, California, operating in conjunction with the Denver and Rio Grande Western and the Western Pacific. On April 25, 1946, train number 11, the Advance Flyer, departed Chicago's Union Station at 12:35 p.m., right on time, and was sent down track 2, the bidirectional track. The train consisted of 2 newer EMD E7s, numbered 9920A and 9920B, 5 baggage and mail cars owned by the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, and the CB&Q, a New York Central Express fridge car, 2 more CB&Q baggage cars, 2 CB&Q coaches, a diner, a buffet car, and a Northern Pacific coach at the rear. 5 minutes behind them was train number 39, the Exposition Flyer. The train consisted of 2 slightly older EMD E5s, numbered 9910A and 9910B, named the Silver Speed and the Silver Power, 3 coaches from the Denver, Rio Grande and Western and the CB&Q, 1 diner, and 5 Pullman sleeper cars. Both trains were full of families heading home from Easter celebrations the weekend before, and soldiers returning home from World War II, which had ended just a year prior. Everything seemed to be going well at first, until just after 1 p.m., when the rear brakeman, Sherman Grant, signaled for the Advance Flyer to stop after he saw something fly out from under the train. He didn't know what it was, but not wanting to risk a serious accident in case it was something serious, the train stopped at Loomis Street in Naperville, just beyond a gradual curve that trains came through at speed. Just a few minutes after the flagman makes his way toward the rear of the train,
oh my holy God! No! No!
The Exposition Flyer rams into the rear of the Advanced Flyer at over 45 miles an hour. 9910A, the Silver Speed, plowed 3/4 into the rear coach of the Advanced Flyer, crushing several people to death in an instant. The impact was also strong enough to send the buffet car into the lightweight diner ahead of it, which wasn't built for crashworthiness standards even back then. The car was bent into a U-shape as if it was a tin can getting stepped on. The next 2 cars ahead either fell onto their sides or are leaning off the track, derailed. As for the Exposition Flyer cars, the first 5 cars derailed, but apart from the 3rd car's vestibule being crushed, they escaped any serious damage. Thankfully, as if it were a miracle, help wasn't that far away. The Chrysler Furniture Company was right by the crash site. Employees had heard the immense impact and hundreds rushed to help, including Harold Schrader, who saw the wreck coming after walking up to the Advanced Flyer to see what was up. He said in quote,
"Everybody in the factory basically stopped what they were doing and started helping out one way or the other. Ladies in the cafeterias made sandwiches. It was just a complete stoppage of work and everybody basically pitched in and helped out."
An aid station was also set up in their warehouse. 50 North Central College students and countless local residents also came to the rescue. First responders came from as far as Hinsdale, more than 10 miles away, and if that wasn't enough, the CB&Q Railroad even sent a special relief train with doctors and nurses heading toward the crash site, of course taking extra caution so as to not run into the wreck themselves. The consist of the relief train is unknown. The nearby furniture company even used sleeper sofas as temporary hospital beds until an ambulance could transport the survivors to local hospitals in Aurora, while the dead were taken to local funeral homes. By late night, all the injured and most of the bodies had been recovered. When it was all said and done, 45 people had lost their lives, including the fireman of the Exposition Flyer, who bailed just before impact. He was the only death on the Exposition Flyer. Though even if the fireman didn't bail, he would have been killed by a piece of shrapnel from one of the coaches penetrating through the cab window right to where he would have been sitting. I guess he was going to die either way that afternoon. More than 125 were injured, including the engineer of the Exposition Flyer, Wallace Blaine, who amazingly climbed out of his wrecked E5 and made his way by himself to an aid station despite a severe head injury and a skull fracture. Engineer A.W. Anderson of the Advanced Flyer was uninjured, as was his brakeman, Sherman Grant, as well as the flagman. Four different investigations were launched to figure out what had happened, including one from the Interstate Commerce Commission and the railroad themselves. This incident was about to be one of the most significant in American railroad history, and probably one of the most preventable, or at least one where the severity wouldn't have been as great. Tests of all the signals and the brake systems of the Exposition Flyer showed they were all working as intended, and that there was also clear weather and no obstructions of the signals that day. After the Advanced Flyer stopped, signal 227.1, which was 6,551 feet away from the point of impact, displayed an approach aspect, which generally means, according to NORAC, proceed but be prepared to stop at the next signal. Trains exceeding medium speed must begin reduction to medium speed as soon as the entire engine passes the approach signal. That next signal was 228.1, which was at a stop aspect, meaning stop, the block is occupied. It seems as if the engineer had failed to do so, as even the engineer admitted he was going too fast. He stated that he immediately applied the brakes upon seeing signal 227.1, showing approach, which slowed from 80 miles an hour to over 45 miles an hour until it struck the rear of the Advanced Flyer. Now, here's where things get a little muddy. Testimonies from the crew of the Exposition Flyer indicated that the train didn't have any brake applications until between signals 227.1 and 228, not before 227 as it should have been. Then, upon inspecting the brake piston on the Silver Speed 9910, it was in a full service application upon impact, a 30-pound one to be precise, not an emergency application or a full 90 pounds, despite what the engineer had stated and what eyewitnesses had stated, but it did support what the crew members had said. Subsequent tests of a train consisting of similar equipment showed that if the brakes were applied at signal 227.1 with the train traveling at 81 miles an hour, the train should have stopped 395 feet before signal 228, right where it should have been, and then applying the emergency brakes at 86 miles an hour at the point that signal 228.1 came into view resulted in a stop just 393 feet beyond the point of impact. Clearly the accident would have been less severe had he had followed the signals accordingly, or it wouldn't have happened at all. But of course, with all accidents, it's not just one person or device that fails that leads to catastrophe. There's multiple factors that can lead up to it. Questions about the crew of the advanced flyer stopping the train just before the curve were raised. While yes, it is a good idea to stop your train as soon as something looks as if to have fallen off your train or looks abnormal, but it could be argued that the train could have been stopped either at Naperville Station just ahead or on a straightaway and inspect from there. Some also agreed that scheduling trains at such short time frames apart from each other also contributed to the accident, as was the case in many other incidents, even from the last century. Then the flagman came under scrutiny of the accident. As the advanced flyer approached Naperville, the flagman was in the 12th car inspecting the train as it rounded the curve at the time. All of his equipment was on the 13th car at the rear. Upon the brake applications and the train beginning to stop, he went to the rear to prepare for work. However, he didn't throw any fuses or flares as the train was stopping because, in his experience, they often wouldn't remain lit. After the train had stopped, he proceeded rearward of about 300 feet from the rear of the advanced flyer, giving a stop signal when the exposition flyer loomed into view. Tests after the accident indicated 10-minute flares dropped from the rear of trains in excess of 40 miles an hour did support the flagman's theory, as they either bounced off the track area or failed to burn. Also, strangely, the engineer didn't sound the following horn signal to indicate the flagman should start flagged protection until the train had stopped. But wait, there's more. The flagman didn't flick the switch to the oscillating red marker light, also known as a Mars light, that also would have helped indicate to the exposition flyer that another train was just ahead of them, although because of the curve, this is debated. Why it wasn't even on in the first place before the train had left the station remains a mystery. After the accident, a DuPage County grand jury found that though the railroad and some employees were guilty of negligence, they agreed that no single act had caused the wreck. No indictments were made, and charges against the exposition flyer's engineer were eventually dropped. The Burlington increased headway on the two trains from 2 minutes to 15 minutes the following May to prevent future incidents, and added a new signal aspect, flashing yellow, meaning conditional approach, also known as slow approach. This aspect indicates that the train must decrease to slow speed and get ready to stop at the next signal, and not increase to medium speed until the entire train clears the block. This isn't to be confused with restricting, which is a low solid yellow or a gray lunar signal depending on the railroad, where you can pass at restricted speed, often described as fast enough to stop within half the sight distance, but in general, no more than 10 to 15 miles an hour, and either prepare to stop at the next signal, find another train ahead of you, and to not increase speed until either a more favorable signal presents itself, or if the train enters non-cab signal or dark signal territories. In the words of most railroaders, a restricting aspect means don't hit anything. Words to live by. Stop and proceed is similar, but you must stop at the signal anyway and get permission before proceeding if conditions are right. That's only scratching the surface of today's aspects, which can change meaning depending on what rulebook the railroad follows, and signals can sometimes vary from shapes and sizes and how they display aspects. It's quite complicated, but a lot of the basic signals are pretty much the same. Despite recommendations from the Interstate Commerce Commission after the accident, the CB&Q would still run mixed heavyweight and lightweight train consists, but the railroad was already replacing heavyweight cars with stainless steel, lightweight Zeppur cars anyway, even though the mixed consists would still prove deadly in crashes, just like Naperville. The 3-track main was passed down to Burlington's successor, the Burlington Northern, in 1970, and is still in use today, being owned and used by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, who uses the main line for freight. Amtrak uses it for medium to long-range passenger service, and of course there's Metra, who uses the line for commuter rail service. The Exposition Flyer, though, would stop running after 1949, being replaced in segments by the famous California Zephyr, and then after March 22, 1970, it was replaced again by Amtrak's San Francisco Zephyr, later the current California Zephyr, as well as Rio Grande's short-lived Rio Grande Zephyr. As for the equipment involved, a few of the rear cars of the Advanced Flyer, including Northern Pacific Coach 1376, which was split in half, as well as the crushed lightweight Diner, were scrapped. Other damaged passenger cars and the E5 locomotives of the Exposition Flyer were repaired and returned to service. Both 9910A and B were sold to the Colorado and Southern in 1955, renumbered as 9951A and B respectively, until being retired in October of 1967, being traded in for SD40s. Both were scrapped shortly thereafter, leaving 9911A, the Silver Pilot, the sole E5 to survive, and is currently operational at the Illinois Railroad Museum in Union, Illinois. The rear car of the Exposition Flyer, the Mount Darwin, is also still around and is currently at the Galveston Railroad Museum in Galveston, Texas. As for the Advanced Flyer's locomotives, both continued with CB&Q, only for 9920A to end up in another accident on September 27, 1964, when it was misrouted into a standing Rock Island train, killing 4 crew members and destroying both 9920A and 9922B and damaging 9987A. 9920B survived until March of 1968, being retired, scrapped, and traded in for a GE U30B. Today, only one E7 survives, and that's Pennsylvania Railroad 5901A, on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. Though the crash is not as well known as other incidents, it was still a major reason why most passenger trains in the United States, even today, have a maximum speed limit of 79 miles an hour or 127 kilometers an hour, and freight trains often between 50 to 70 miles an hour. The CB&Q, Milwaukee Road, and Illinois Central were among the railroads in the region running passenger trains up to and above 100 miles an hour at the time of the accident. The Interstate Commerce Commission ruled, though, that by 1951, trains traveling 80 miles an hour or more must have an automatic cab signal, automatic train stop, or automatic train control systems. Expensive but life-saving technologies that were implemented on some lines in the regions and was pioneered by other companies in the East, namely the Pennsylvania Railroad, where cab signal indications would display in the cab and any other aspect other than clear would have to be acknowledged, otherwise the train would go into emergency stop. And while that system and others on the former Pennsy network still exist today on rails owned by Amtrak and Norfolk Southern, most of the cab signal systems in the Midwest have since been mostly removed. Many argue that systems such as positive train control, which work similar to cab signals using satellite technology, could have also prevented this accident had it been available at the time, but after a series of recent train collisions in southeast Pennsylvania, Georgia, and more, that could be up for debate now. Even so, positive train control would have been the work of science fiction back in those days. The accident also put on the brakes for advancements in train speed in the United States. However, while some Amtrak lines as well as privately owned Brightline are pushing for higher speeds, the former Pennsylvania Railroad network on Amtrak's Northeast Corridor have trains routinely travel at 80 to 125 miles an hour, and the Acela Express even pushes 150 miles an hour in select regions such as in New Brunswick, New Jersey, Mansfield, Massachusetts, and Richmond, Rhode Island, using that very cab signal system of the Pennsylvania Railroad days and positive train control. Talks of the successor, the Avail Liberty, pushing speeds of 160 to 180 miles an hour are in the works if infrastructure improvements are met. In 2012, 66 years later, Chuck Spinner published a book titled The Tragedy at Loomis Street Crossing, dedicated to the victims of the accident. Thanks to the interest generated by the book, a Naperville committee selected Paul Kuhn to create a sculpture at the site where the accident occurred. The sculpture, erected in 2014, was made of 5,000 railroad spikes commemorating both the victims, local heroes, and the rescue workers involved on that fateful day over 78 years ago.